The first reading from the book of the prophet Isaiah tells us about how Israel is called to be a light to the nations, that God's particular election of Israel as his own chosen people was never meant to be purely about them, but rather God was, as it were, entering the world through this one particular place and nation so that God may reveal himself to all humanity, to all the nations, what the Jewish people called the goyim, the ethnoi, the Gentiles, right? That's what the word Gentiles means, or the nations, ad gentes in Latin, right? And so in the gospel, 800 years after the prophet Isaiah, we see the fulfillment of that promise in Jesus, right? Because it is Jesus who enters, the incarnate Son of God, who enters human history through Israel, right? Jesus has this divine lineage, right? Because he is God's divine son, but he is also the son of Mary and legally also the son of Joseph. And so he has this human ancestry too, which runs straight through Israel, right? Even going back to David the king and going back to Abraham himself, right? And so Israel became that light to the nations through Christ. He is the true light who shines in the darkness of sin and death in order to reconcile all of humanity to God the Father in the Holy Spirit, right? So that is the good news that greets us on this Sunday, and it is great news. But, there's also the challenge that this gospel presents to us, and that all the readings present to us. In the gospel, we're reminded that the Jewish people are being reminded by Jesus that on the last day, when all is said and done, it's not going to be sufficient to state that they have a certain kind of ethnicity, or they speak a certain language. Jesus is trying to teach them that it is truly the union of the heart, right? Charity is friendship with God, and that is what will matter on the last day. Not the fact that, that someone is Jewish or not, or, by analogy for us as Catholics, if you can say, well, I'm Irish Catholic, I'm Italian Catholic, right? It's not any language that we speak. It's not any sort of particular ethnicity, because no one is born Catholic, are we? We may be born into a family of Catholics, but it is only through the sacrament of baptism that we truly become Christians, right? And so no one is born a Catholic. It's not passed down by ancestry. In fact, the only thing passed down is, spiritually speaking, is original sin. It is baptism that frees us from that. It makes us temples of the living God, and that is what makes us children of God, right? That beautiful phrase that we often sort of throw around, but there are many, many people in the world. In fact, most of the 8 billion people in the world would not agree with the premise that they are children of God. Some of them would find it utterly blasphemous to speak of themselves in that way, or to speak of God as something that personal and that close to us. Right, and so that is the identity that we claim because of the event of Christ's death and resurrection, the merits of which, the grace of which is communicated to us through baptism. Okay. Now, there's also the challenge. We hear in the second reading from the letter to the Hebrews that because we are children of God, if we really are going to claim that identity, and we must. If we're here in church today, that's what we're here. It's the Lord that gathers us together, right, as his own children. But the author of the letter to the Hebrews reminds the Christians who are actively undergoing pressure and even persecution because of their faith. He says to them, remember, every good parent, every good father has to discipline his children, right? That is something that, imagine a child that grows up never having been disciplined, right? And they make it into adulthood. They've never been told no. They've never been told they can't do something. They've never been punished because they did something wrong. You would not want to live next door to that person, would you? No, right? All of us, as we emerge into adulthood, will look back gratefully, hopefully, at the discipline given to us by our parents, right? And yes, it's unpleasant when it happens. It's unpleasant when we're told that we have to stay home and do our homework instead of going out, or it's unpleasant when we're told that we stole the keys of the car and now we're grounded, right? All that is unpleasant. but it's necessary. Just like we wouldn't want to live next door to someone who was only ever punished or treated harshly by their parents, by their father, right? That kind of person doesn't make it as a successful adult either, right? So those of us that are either biological fathers or spiritual fathers have a grave responsibility, right, to balance that mercy and justice, because they're both essential as we deal with the situations that we deal with, right? There's a little tradition among priests that when priests are ordained, they give to their mothers the cloth that is used to wipe their hands when they're so sacred oil, the chrism is poured on your hands when you're ordained a priest. It's a tradition of taking that cloth, which is called the maniturgium, and giving it as a gift to your mother. And then sort of along with that tradition came this other tradition of, well, you have to give your father something. If you're giving your mother something, you have to give your father something. And one of the traditions of that is giving him the stole that you wore at hearing your first confession. Right? Because there's something about that balance of mercy and justice that the sacrament of reconciliation really embodies in the humanity of the priest that's called to celebrate and preside at that sacrament, right? There's something about that is integral to the life of every father, right? To the life of every parent. But so the author of the letter is telling us that we have to accept that discipline, right? And what does that godly discipline look like? How is it that God disciplines us as his own sons, right? As his own children. Right? We don't discipline people that we don't care so much about, right? We discipline the people that we care the most about. And that's how God relates to us. And how does he do that? Maybe some of you were the oldest in your families. I was the oldest in my family. I'm also the favorite in my family, but that's a whole different story, okay? But I was definitely the oldest. And sometimes as we're growing up, when we're the oldest, we can have a sense that, well, I don't get away with as much as my younger siblings. Have you ever said that before or thought that before? I don't get away with as much. I have more responsibility put on me than my brother and sister, right? Or they are harder on me when I do something wrong than they are on my siblings, right? Have you ever sort of thought about that when you were growing up? That's one way that God disciplines us. Sometimes we can look at our lives and say, God is placing responsibilities on me that seem greater than the responsibilities he's placing on someone else. That's how that sort of manifests itself in a relationship with God. Sometimes it seems like God is putting more responsibility, more burdens on this person than on that person, or specifically, right, on me, meaning, in myself, in my own prayer, we can all do this and say, God, you're putting too much on me, and other people don't seem to have this kind of burden, right? By the way, that might be true. God might be asking of you something greater than he's asking for something than someone else. The scriptures tell us that that's very common, that Jesus asked for certain things from some and not from others. So that's not actually the problem. The problem comes if we either grow in pride because of that, or if we come to resent it, or if we don't see it for what it is, which is God disciplining us. Sometimes it's the discipline of the burdens of responsibility. Right? Other times it's through suffering, right? We all suffer various ways in our lives, but sometimes we feel like some people seem to suffer more than others, or maybe we're feeling this way right now in our own prayer. Maybe we feel like, I feel like I'm suffering. God's putting me through this terrible burden. It's a health crisis or a problem in my family or something at work, whatever it is, and I'm just sort of suffering. I don't know why. Again, it seems to be a fact of life that some people just seem to suffer more than others. We don't know why that is, but we know that God is using it to prune us, to make us more faithful disciples. He uses that experience to give us that godly discipline, to make us more like himself. Right? And there's many other ways that God will choose this. You know the easiest way to do this, right? It's not by accepting great burdens, or it's not by sort of persevering through great sufferings. The easiest way to do this, and when we're not in either of those categories, is to pray. Right? It's through prayer and closeness with the Lord in that dialogue of prayer that we grow in intimacy and that we become like God through that encounter. And the other way we can do this is by suffering with others, or by bearing the burdens of others who are currently experiencing difficulty in one way or another. Right? So that is how God can use us, all of us, in every situation in which we find ourselves today. We're either suffering or experiencing great burdens, or there are people that we can pray for and assist who are going through that. And the communion of saints, we pray every Sunday in the Creed, I believe in the communion of saints, is that community of children of God, made one through baptism, who gather around the altar of the Lord each Sunday in the Eucharist, and then through that ingathering are then sent out to do just what I described at this Mass, to carry out the tasks that he gives to us, to accept the sufferings and challenges of our own lives, to pray, to allow the graces of the sacrament to become real and present in our own lives, and then to extend those graces to others that are in need. May we, as we experience the love and mercy of God today, also accept the challenges that come with being his children, knowing that through it, he wants to make us holy. He wants to make us saints.